America Viva. On the road, talking about lived history, remarkable places, and real life.
Hello, my name is Tom Noga. I am a reporter, filmmaker, explorer. In this podcast, I talk about traveling, or I talk with a special guest about life, culture, and the world. Sometimes far away, sometimes right on our doorstep. Today we're taking a road trip on a legendary road, maybe the most legendary in the whole world. On a road that doesn't exist anymore. At least, not as a U.S. highway. Much of it, however, is drivable to this day. We're talking about Route 66, obviously. My guest today is Rhys Martin. Hi, Rhys.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Rhys Martin is the president of the Oklahoma Route 66 Association. What is that?
So after Route 66 was decertified and taken off the map, people in every state got together and said, this highway is still important. It needs to be preserved. And these small-town main streets still need to be supported. So within a few years, by 1990, all 8 states had formed their own historic Route 66 association, including the one here in Oklahoma. I've been serving as president of this organization since 2019, and we help promote the highway, help people find it, and then know what to do when they get on it.
You live in Tulsa. We're born and raised there. Route 66 runs through Tulsa. What is your personal connection with Route 66?
Yeah, I was born and raised here in Tulsa, but, I never really thought about Route 66. It was just another street in the city. But in 2009, I left the country and did some backpacking internationally, fell in love with history and photography and writing. And when I came back home, it stood out to me. It was something I just never paid attention to and thought, well, I'll just take a road trip and see what I find. And then I quickly fell in love with the highway and its story. And after about 2 years, I'd driven the whole thing and started asking, how can I help keep this road alive?
What were you looking for when you drove it for the first time?
Well, the first time, I had my camera with me and I was just looking for interesting roadside buildings, attractions, landmarks to photograph. I love old metal bridges and was just curious what I'd see. I figured I'd see a few things, but most things would be abandoned or forgotten. And immediately I was proven wrong. I drove up to the town of Miami in Oklahoma, which is real near the Kansas border. And they have a 1929 theater that's just absolutely beautiful. And, I thought, well, what is something this beautiful and this well taken care of with this in this town that is not quite big enough that you would think that would support something that was so expensive to build back in the 1920s? I thought, well, what else is out here? So I kept driving and realized the entire road was still very much alive. So my focus shifted from taking pictures of abandoned buildings and old bridges to talking to people and learning more about its history, which then, of course, turned into me wanting to share that with other people.
I drove Route 66 last year for a TV documentary and did an interview with you at this occasion, and I came through Miami. You mentioned this theater there. What does it represent?
Well, when the theater was built in the late 1920s, the gentleman that built it was unhappy that a lot of the very popular touring performances like vaudeville and people like Will Rogers weren't coming to his town. It was too small. And he'd made a lot of money in the mining industry and said, well, I'll build a theater that's so beautiful and so ornate, people are going to have to come play and perform on this stage. And so to me, that theater represents kind of somebody making a decision for their community and investing in their community in a way that lifted everybody up. And then, of course, the rest of the story is that over the years, the interstates opened, Route 66 traffic went down, the theater was not in great shape, it was donated to the city, then a whole bunch of volunteers got together to restore the theater, and today you would never guess it was ever in a position where the roof was leaking and the inside was in poor shape and it was just about to, fall in on itself. So not only does it represent this era in the early 1920s of people coming together to make their communities better, but then also represents the fact that people came together again to restore something that was important to their town and are now very proud to show that to people from the rest of the world that travel Route 66.
Maybe it represents optimism too. I mean, you build a theater pretty big for a very small town, so you anticipate this town will be growing and prospering.
Right. There's hope there. There's someone that says, I have a big idea, and if I go along with this and make this a reality, other people are going to be inspired by it, and it will make the entire community better. And I think today Route 66 still serves that function to a degree of bringing the community together and showing people that we have more in common than we have that divides us.
You taught me this story already when we met last year. I kept thinking about it. To me, this is typical American. We Europeans, if I may generalize, if we have to find ourselves or something like that, tend to look inward instead. And if we feel the need to get away from where we live, we might go to a remote place to contemplate. You guys, on the other hand, get into your car, start driving, hoping to find a new life beyond the next bend, the next mountain, even beyond the horizon. Is it that what Route 66 represents for many Americans?
I think it does. You know, Route 66, as cliche as it sounds, has a representation of freedom, of the open road, of going where you want to go, and just discovering what's over the next hill. It's walking into a diner that's one of a kind and eating a meal that's either going to be the best food you've ever had, or something that, you're, going to regret going into. There's very few of that, but there's that chance. It's not something that's cookie cutter or generic that you can find in the next town. Same with the really quirky roadside attractions. Basically, it's one long highway of people that are being themselves. It's individuality. And for me, it encouraged me to be myself. Even though before I got into Route 66, I traveled around the world and backpacked. When I came home, I don't really say I found myself traveling. I just became more comfortable with who I already was. And Route 66 continues that journey for me and shows me that, the person that I am is okay. And there are other people out here that, reaffirm that every day I'm out on the road.
Talking about the most terrible dinner you ever had. Actually, I had the most terrible dining experience of my whole life on Route 66. At a place called McLean in the Texas Panhandle.
The restaurant that I usually go to in McLean is called the Red River Steakhouse, and it's on the edge of town by itself. But I can tell that at one time, a lot of the little downtown area had little restaurants and diners in there. Most of them are gone now. And like any other business, if you get a reputation for being inconsistent or unreliable, you're not going to last very long.
We talked about the idea of leaving everything behind if things don't work at home. I suppose this dates back to the days of the colonies and the frontier. Am I right or am I wrong?
You're right. For pretty much all of American history, it's been punctuated by people that are seeking a better life somewhere else, or the challenge and the excitement of going someplace new to see how that might change your life. I mean, even with Route 66, the first thing that made it famous in newspapers and in pop culture was the immigration of people from the center of the country during the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, heading west to find a better life for themselves. And Route 66, wasn't the only highway in America when it was established, far from it. But it very quickly set itself apart as a road that represented bettering yourself, finding yourself, and looking for something that would make your life better. And even after World War II, and you had people that went out on vacation on Route 66, it still represented that idea that if I get in the car and I go somewhere new, I can reinvent myself. And that's still very attractive to people today.
For those who don't know what the Dust Bowl was, we might have to explain it.
Yeah, it was devastating. So in the 19-teens and 1920s in the center part of America, the simplest version is that certain crops were much more lucrative than others. So a lot of farmers would plant the same crops over and over again and tear out the natural grasses and the things that kept the ecosystem in balance. And so by the time you get into a severe drought in the late 1920s and then the 1930s, dust would literally blow everywhere because the crops were failing, and the ecosystem was out of balance. So people had to load everything they owned into their vehicles and go somewhere else. It was a huge ecological disaster that we're very lucky that we were able to recover from. And today in western Oklahoma, the Texas Panhandle, you can still see some evidence of old homesteads that were abandoned when they could no longer support people. But it was a major deal.
About 400,000 people fled from Oklahoma and Kansas to California in those years, right?
That's right. There was a book by John Steinbeck called The Grapes of Wrath that came out in the late 1930s, and then a film based on that book that is still such a great way for people that aren't familiar with the Dust Bowl and the refugee crisis that created to understand a little bit of what life was like then.
Back in 2006, I also interviewed Shirley Mills. You know who she was?
No.
She was an actress, actually. She passed away a couple of years ago. When I interviewed her, she was an elderly lady already. She had been the little girl in the movie Grapes of Wrath, Ruthie, the youngest daughter of the Joad family.
Excellent.
The interview touched me. When she talked about the Dust Bowl and the suffering of the people, she got so emotional about it, even 60 years after the film was made.
There's a book I read last year called The Worst Hard Time that is an incredible telling of that story and the people that came together to reverse all of the damage that had been done. And it's impossible for me to really understand what it was like to be in a dust storm that was so bad that the static electricity would kill people. Like, it generated lightning. There was so much dirt in the air. It was just a really just devastating time in American history.
Coming back to leaving one place to find something better somewhere else. How does America's manifest destiny play into that? The idea that Americans were destined to conquer the whole subcontinent, or at least break through to the Pacific.
Well, so you have both good and bad that happened with the manifest destiny mindset. Of course, it encouraged pioneers to go into the frontier and make a place for themselves. It encouraged people to head west, and it gave people this sense of confidence that they were meant to be there, and that gives you energy when the environment may be working against you. Maybe it's a very difficult crossing, but if you have this feeling that this is something you're supposed to do, you're able to overcome so many obstacles. But on the flip side of that, that was very destructive to the Native American culture that was already here. Even in the Route 66 era, you had a lot of situations where Native American culture was misrepresented or taken advantage of because people were kind of in love with the idea of the romantic West and the old West as it was in Hollywood, not necessarily the real culture. In Oklahoma, Route 66 goes through 14 different tribal nations that all have their own histories and cultures and everything, and so things are better now than they were. You have a lot of places where people can learn about authentic Native American culture across the road, especially out west in New Mexico and Arizona. But that idea of manifest destiny and that America was supposed to reach from coast to coast, was good in some aspects and not in others. But it's where we are today. And Route 66 can still connect you to both kind of that history and the authenticity that exists in all of these states.
Manifest destiny was fulfilled, one would think, at the latest, once roads like Route 66 connected the whole country. However, political scientist Kurt Jacobson, whom I interviewed for my film 2, argues that it has never ever come to an end. It stretches farther west across the Pacific, south through Latin America, and even toward the Arctic. Would you agree?
That's an interesting question. I travel Route 66 constantly, and I get the luxury of seeing people from other parts of the world, including west of the Pacific coast here, that are coming our way to experience this and to be a part of it. And, like in Oklahoma City on Route 66, you have a refugee community that sprouted up during the Vietnam War where people left that country to come here, again, trying to seek a better life. So I really kind of see it going both ways. American culture does spread across the globe in a lot of different ways, but I also see people from other countries coming here and they want to add their story to what Route 66 represents. And so I just feel really fortunate that I get to be a part of this large international community that Route 66 is slowly mixing every year a little more and getting a little more representation from other places. But that street definitely goes both ways.
You meet travelers from abroad on a regular basis. What does Route 66 represent to them?
For the conversations I've had, it seems to represent the ability to have a dream, to have something you want to do, whether it's open a business or own a home or be a part of a community, and have the power and the means to do that. There's a gentleman in Seligman, Arizona that owns a motel, grew up in Europe, took a Route 66 trip, fell in love with the road story, and then came over here, bought a motel, and serves Route 66 travelers. He and I have talked about, that he lives in Seligman, Arizona, and, the cost of living is lower. He could open a business. He gets to serve people. Other folks in other communities see it as a way to kind of add whatever their story is to this legendary highway. We're really lucky that when you say Route 66, a lot of people have an image that pops into their head. People kind of know at least generally what that is. And so it has this appeal. I think everybody wants to be a part of something greater than themselves. And for a lot of people, Route 66 is that thing.
When I traveled Route 66 last year, I happened to meet a couple of motorcycle groups all along the road. One of which in Tulsa, where you greeted them at Buck Adams' Curio Shop. The stops those groups made were always short. Shooting photos, buying souvenirs, having their Route 66 passport stamped. That's not much of an adventure, is it?
Well, it depends on what you're looking for. I love talking to people that have never been to America before, and Route 66 is kind of their introduction to just how big this country is. And when I say, well, I can get in the car and drive for 5 hours and still be in the same state, let alone the same country, you can kind of see them think about that and register. For most people, Route 66 itself is the destination. So even if they can't stop and spend several hours at every location, then some days are, just stop, get a picture, and get back on the motorcycle and head to the next destination. The way the landscape changes from Illinois to Chicago all the way out to the Pacific Ocean is an adventure in itself. You get to see so much variety and meet so many people, even if it's just for 5 or 10 minutes. By the time you get to Santa Monica Pier in California, you've had this experience that just shows you how vast America is and the cultural diversity that we have. And so everybody travels the road a little differently. Everybody's itinerary is built with different goals in mind. But if you do the whole thing, by the time you get to the end, as long as you're not on the interstate the whole time, you're going to have a unique experience you'll never forget.
But you're pretty tired once you get to the Santa Monica Pier, I can tell.
Yes.
By comparison, back in 2006, I personally felt the spirit of Route 66 much more strongly than I did last year. Last year, many shops and motels were permanently closed. Munger Moss in Missouri, for example. And many characters, as you call those rather quirky guys who live in the small towns along the road, were gone or had passed away. To me, it felt as though something has already disappeared or was about to disappear. Would you agree?
Well, I would agree that the road is evolving. Route 66 for its entire 100 years has always been changing, whether it's literally the pavement moving from one street to the next, or the signs moving, or the interstate eventually coming in and bypassing it. You also have these people and these longtime businesses that, people get older. Maybe the kids don't want to take over the business and they close, as such in the case with the Munger Moss Motel up in Lebanon, Missouri. So you have these ebbs and flows of support, of people that know the road. The first person that really got me into Route 66 as a person, her name was Laurel Kane. She had a Packard Automobile Museum in Afton, Oklahoma. We just marked 10 years since she passed away. When I meet travelers now, there are so many people I wish I could introduce them to that are gone, or businesses that have closed. And that's always been the case. And I think in modern times, when the road is a little more connected with social media and the guidebooks and things like that, it's easy to feel like you've lost something that you can't get back when a business closes or a longtime Route 66 supporter passes away. And there's truth to that. But you also have new people coming to the road that have been inspired by these people that are adding their story to it, like Mary Beth Babcock, who has Buck Adams that you mentioned earlier, or Sebastian de Border, the gentleman that owns the Aztec Motel out in Seligman, that are going to be the next generation's Route 66 personalities that they stop to visit with. I'm sure we're going to see another wave happen after the centennial. There have been so many people that have been really looking forward to the 2026 as 100 years, and they're probably going to take a step back afterwards because, you're tired after a long road trip. You're also tired after planning for a big celebration like this. But Route 66 still has an appeal for people that are young and that are just discovering it. So I don't think it's ever going to go away, but it is going to continue to evolve.
Not only for the young, and having said that, I felt less of the Route 66 spirit last year than in 2006. This doesn't mean I didn't feel it at all. Especially in the West, the spirit of freedom and adventure and the joy of being on the road, I felt that very, very strongly. As one of my interviewees, historian David Dunaway, put it, the horizon limitless. It can be filled with your imagination. Those cultural images still work. Even for me as an European, do you still feel the spirit having traveled the road it so many times?
I do. And even when I'm out on business traveling Route 66 and meeting people, in my role with the National Trust for Historic Preservation or anything else that I do, I still take the old highway when I can because there's always something new to see. There's always another place I can stop and spend a little more time than maybe I was able to in the past. But like I mentioned, with the road evolving, I never know what, maybe a building has fallen down and nobody, has shared that yet, or maybe a new business is getting ready to open. We have to encourage people. Route 66 has always been greater than the sum of its parts. And, we do what we can to provide resources to help people preserve buildings and preserve stories. But at the end of the day, it's up to each community to take ownership of their little slice of Route 66.
Route 66 stretches for about 2,400 miles, or almost 4,000 kilometers. Driving it from Chicago to LA might be too much for many travelers. For those who want to shorten the trip, what must not be left out traveling it?
Oh boy, that's like asking to pick a favorite child. I always defer to the places where you can meet somebody that is part of the road story or a singular experience. There are lots of gift shops, there are lots of restaurants, there are lots of roadside attractions, but there's only one Cozy Dog Drive-In in Springfield, Illinois, where you get to meet the Waldmeyer family, who have a long history on Route 66, both for food and for art, for the late Bob Waldmeyer. There's only one Jim Hinckley in Kingman, Arizona, a historian out there that if you get to meet him and tour Kingman with him, you'll get all kinds of stories that aren't in guidebooks or history books that come with his unique flavor of color. But if somebody's traveling Route 66 and they come to me and say, look, I only have a couple of days, I can hop off just in a few places, I generally recommend the Blue Whale here in Catoosa, Oklahoma, which is not far from where I live. Just a quirky, fun roadside attraction that, defies belief that there's this giant concrete whale in the middle of Oklahoma, which is dozens of hours from any ocean. You have the midpoint of Route 66 in Adrian, Texas, which is the middle point between Chicago and Los Angeles. That's a fantastic photo op. The Painted Desert in Arizona is... I like it a little better than the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon gets a lot of the attention, but the Painted Desert is so beautiful, and it's very quiet most of the time. A great place to kind of reflect on the grandeur of the landscape of Western America. And you've got to stop in Seligman, Arizona, and meet Angel Delgadillo. More than any other person, I would say he's responsible for the revitalization era of Route 66 that started in the early 1990s. Because he was the one that stood up and said, Route 66 is still here, we're still important, and he helped found the first historic association and so many things. And whether you get to meet Angel or his family, it's a wonderful place to visit for a few minutes and just learn a little history.
Angel is a great guy, for sure. To sum it up, Springfield, Missouri, Catoosa, Texas, Painted Desert, and Seligman in Arizona. So you recommend doing the whole trip, right?
If you can do the whole trip, I recommend it. But it's more important that you take your time on Route 66. So if you only have a weekend, just pick a small section of it and make sure you stop and visit. I'm really fond of this section between Springfield, Missouri, and my hometown of Tulsa. Because Springfield is the birthplace of Route 66. That's where it got its number back in 1926. They've got a great museum there. You get to stop and see Barb and George at Gary's Gay Parita and Spencer, Missouri, which is this ghost town that's being resurrected by Ed Klein and his wife. You know, you get to go through Carthage and Joplin, the little section of Kansas that has all this history related to the Pixar movie Cars. And then you get a little bit of Oklahoma, which, you know, I'm a little partial to my home state, but that's the Coleman Theater that I mentioned in Miami, and then you end up in Tulsa, which has given itself the title capital of Route 66 because of its investment in Route 66 and it being the home of Cyrus Avery, who helped get the road established in the first place. So if all you have is a few days and you can do that section, that'll give you a little bit of everything.
Sounds good to me. Do you have a favorite place on Route 66?
That answer changes every time I get that question.
I asked you this question already last year, and I loved the answer you gave me. And since I loved it so much, I want to have it again. Sorry, man.
Oh boy, I don't remember what answer I gave you last time we spoke, but right now, the place that is coming to mind is there's this little area near the New Mexico-Arizona border that the first time I saw it, I was heading from New Mexico to Arizona. The sun was rising, so it was coming up behind me. And there's this rise. You can see the bluffs in the distance that mark the border of Arizona. There's a river down below you and a train track. I pulled my car over, got out of the car, and just to take pictures of the river and the beautiful landscape around me. And I hear a train horn in the distance. And so it forced me to stop and wait. You know, even me, I'll tell people all day long to take your time. Don't just take a picture and get back in the car. And I still struggle because I feel like there's more things I got to see. But it forced me to wait and to stand there for a while, wait for the train to come, and just be in that moment. Every time I'm out there now, even if it's 100 degrees and, you know, I've got a place I've got to be, I'll still stop, get out of the car, and even if it's just 5 minutes, just stand there and let myself exist. And that means so much to me. Right now, that's my favorite place on Route 66.
That's exactly what you told me last year. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Thanks a lot for visiting, Rhys.
My pleasure.
And you, dear listeners, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you like it, please subscribe and feel free to leave a comment. If you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, you find links to my website in the description below. You can listen to my 3-part podcast about Route 66 on my website. The German version will air as a Lange Nacht on DLF and the film on Arte. Take care. Your Tom Noga.